welcome everybody to this hashtag Tell Researchers and hashtag HE Researchers with Professor Jackie Potter. I just introduced myself. My name's John Brindle. I am a Learning Design Manager at Edge Hill University and a PhD student at Lancaster University, where I'm researching inclusive practice in third space professions. And I'm going to introduce my co-host, Puyin Wong. You want to introduce yourself?
Hello. So I'm Puyin. I'm Senior Advisor in Digital Pedagogy and Practice at Buckinghamshire University. Also a PhD peer of John, because we started our journey together and hopefully we'll finish together soon.
Well, I'm really pleased and we're actually delighted to welcome Professor Jackie Potter to talk with us today, who is Dean of Academic Innovation at the University of Chester. And Professor Potter has published on a wide range of higher education topics, including the scholarship of teaching and learning, leadership, curriculum design, and educational change. So welcome, Jackie. We're really, really pleased to welcome you to the series. So I think we can start with a really good question, which, if that's okay, if you're happy with that introduction.
I'm all ears.
So I think this is a really good one, actually. We're formulating questions and things. So how do you usually introduce yourself now when somebody asks, so what kind of researcher are you?
It's a really good question. I don't have a neat answer for it. I've never been asked what kind of a researcher I am. I've been asked how I got into this. And I've been asked, what's the most recent thing you've done, or what have you been working on, or what's the biggest impact actually of anything that you've published. But I don't think I've ever been asked what kind of a researcher I am. I think I would have to say opportunistic would be my one-word answer. I think what I do is don't have a kind of a mission or a zeal or a passion for a particular methodology or approach or for a topic or a subject, but what I do is, in the course of my working life, is I take opportunities where I can to turn activity into research, and predominantly to focus on outputs of that research that might have value for a wider community than simply doing the work, I suppose, behind closed doors, I suppose.
Well, that's really interesting. And so I'll follow up with that one for the kind of opening questions. And your career to becoming Professor Jackie Potter, do you think was it a carefully planned thing, or was it kind of a series of interesting kind of detours, or what was that journey like for you?
Well, my original work as a researcher, I did a PhD and a postdoctoral research fellowship in Arctic environmental biology at the universities of Manchester and Sheffield. And I worked out in Svalbard, off of the coast of northern Norway at 79 degrees north, and in northern Sweden at 66 degrees north. So that was the first 10-15 years of my academic career was very much working with quantitative data sets, collecting ecological information about communities, and running experiments to look at what would happen in different climate change scenarios. And it was only when I started teaching and took an academic lecturing role, and I only took that because I got pregnant and I didn't want to be on a fixed term contract and out of a job in a year's time with a baby and not much of a future, or no sense of what my future might hold. I got into teaching and got really kind of inspired by teaching. And at the time, it was the noughties, there was lots of money for people like me to apply for, to do research into their teaching practices or into what was happening in their departments or universities. And maybe because I had experience writing grants, I got quite successful at getting money to do small bits of educational research. And so it was not that it was planned at a kind of meta level that I would transform from being somebody who did research in a discipline to someone who did educational research. But slowly my success rate with environmental research reduced and my success rate with teaching research increased. And I did methodological courses to make sure that I could do qualitative research approaches, and I had an understanding of kind of qualitative theories and understanding around higher education activity. And I suppose I just became passionately excited about researching what works in teaching and learning. And then my career also moved not only from being a lecturer in the Department of Environmental Science, but I took a job to lead a learning and teaching unit, which is a slightly different kind of trajectory. And that put me into contact with a much wider range of people who were doing learning and teaching research. And I suppose, again, it was a planned career move, but it wasn't particularly planned in terms of what it would do to my research profile, because it was to a professional services role rather than an academic contract. But my research continued, and I was able to embed that in the work I was doing in that way that I described earlier, by taking opportunities to take a research-based approach to academic development as I was then working on. So yeah, that's the kind of starting point, I suppose. And I don't think research was the primary focus of my career change, but what I managed to do was plan it in to my career or my current role throughout a period of job changes when I was working in academic development. And yeah, that was it. I'm just noticing a question. Can I respond to that one in the chat from Paul about, do you think there are sector norms and pressure to move institutions to progress your career, or are there more opportunities now given remote working practices? Because I think that's really quite interesting, because I have a bit of an envy thing with people who stay at the same institution and have a career that gives them really exciting opportunities at different times during that career to do new or exciting work, but they don't change institution. Whereas I've changed institution. I think I've worked, excluding as a researcher and as a PhD student, I've probably worked in 5 universities and for a short time at the Higher Education Academy as well. And I've always changed, and it's always been for the betterment of what I'll do. And it's, I suppose, led to the opportunity to be recognised as a professor, for example. That wasn't possible in one institution, but when I moved, I was recognised as a professor on arrival at another. Opportunities have opened and shut for me in relation to those different roles. And particularly, I've also skipped about in terms of being on an academic contract or a professional services contract. And that's changed some of the opportunities available too. I'm not sure how working from home helps with the kind of career progression piece in relation to institutions. Yeah, it certainly gives me more time, that's for sure.
I guess the point there, Jackie, was about that flexibility of either working between institutions or having flexibility to connect with people you might not normally have connected with if they were all office-based.
Yeah, that's true. I suppose the prevalence of using technology, and I think the pandemic taught us to reach out to people, whereas before we might have been a bit shy or kind of feeling we couldn't do it, or have imposter syndrome if we were going to reach out, particularly to someone in another country with a question or an offer or what have you. Whereas I think now we're kind of bolder to approach strangers, aren't we? And kind of just see what happens in terms of the outcome of a kind of relationship or a collaboration.
And John and I are masters in, after 4 years of doing this series, we are masters in approaching strangers to come and talk to us, you know. And then I think you found out, you know, in sort of these interactions, Jackie, your prime example, you just reply to say, sure, I'll talk about me, you know, and everyone I've approached, I'll be very honest, in the 4.5 years that we've been planning and doing this, one person ignore me, one person ghosted me. That is it. everyone just said, yes, we'll do it. So it's the inclusivity, it's the humbleness from everyone that makes this sector really, really loving. So on that note, I'm going to move on to another question I have. I think you might have started answering this question, but I'm going to ask anyway, because I think there are more moments where, looking back, what are the key moments, 2 or 3 moments where you feel most shape your career, planned or unplanned? I think you mentioned entering into lectureship, full-time contract. It might be an unplanned moment, but are there any kind of significant moment?
Yeah. I mean, the one that I mentioned there, when I was working as a lecturer, I was doing research in my discipline, I was doing research into teaching and learning, and someone asked me, what would your dream job be? And I said, I'd go and work in a big research intensive institution, and I'd tell them just how marvelous teaching and learning is, and I'd show them by getting involved in projects and making a real transformation to student experience. And that was my first big leap, I suppose, that I moved from what was then Chester College of Higher Education to Trinity College Dublin and set up their first academic practice unit. And it was a time in Ireland as well as in the UK where there was a lot of money for teaching and learning, and they were pushing us to collaborate with other universities on projects to develop teaching and learning infrastructure for the country and practices within institutions. And I got involved in a number of big projects to set up a national academy for the integration of teaching, learning and research, on supporting graduate assistants, on developing inclusive curriculum, all sorts of things. But that was a massive opportunity, which I don't think I realised the true extent of how transformative that would be for my career as a kind of leader of educational development, but even more so as someone who was doing research. And it kind of, I suppose I started to take the research more seriously. I think when I was a lecturer, it was the kind of second string to the bow, a secondary to the disciplinary research. When I made that jump, my identity and my research identity became more closely attuned to the work of academic practice and to educational research, or the scholarship of teaching and learning. So that was a huge one. And another kind of leap was when I was back in the UK and I was working at Keele University. And again, this is unplanned, I suppose, in some respects, but it was planned in another, I broke my back and I was off work for about 5 months. And when I was transitioning back into work, there wasn't an awful lot I could do. In fact, it was, in the days when we were supposed to go on campus every day, and that was the only way you could discharge your duties, was by being on site. And, the kind of concept of working remotely was pretty limited. And so I had this conversation with my PVC, and we talked about, well, what could I do if I couldn't get into work and onto site? And I said, well, there's loads of grant bidding opportunities at the moment in teaching and learning. Shall I have a go and see what we get? And in 1 year we were successful with 4 bids that I put together, and that again was transformative, because my job, I was at the time on a professional services contract. My job had been very busy with real operational delivery of activity. And suddenly this space was carved out by necessity to deliver on these projects that were very varied in terms of their focus, but all around teaching and learning. And again, I suppose because I was, phasing back into work slowly and kind of working largely from home, I had more time to put effort into the building of collaborations and working with people to develop really strong teams around those bids. And they were all, really successful and kind of paved the way for relationships and collaborations that went on beyond those projects. And also a whole range of, I suppose, activities that sparked off of it. So that was probably a second major career move. And I suppose it was unplanned. I certainly didn't anticipate that I was going to break my back, but it was planned in the sense of, how can I make the best of this experience and how can I put my research back on track with it? So those are, I suppose, 2 clear ones. And then probably the third one was moving away from Kiel a few years later when I went to Oxford Brookes University, and I was heading up something called the Oxford Centre for Staff Learning and Development, which for me was the most prestigious job in educational leadership, because it had been led by people like Graham Gibbs and Chris Rust and these kind of great names. Well, Rona Sharp for TEL researchers, you know, these great names in academic development, educational leadership with superb scholarly educational research profiles. And I felt, you know, utter imposter syndrome to go and step into the shoes of these people who I'd been reading about and not working with, but just admiring from afar and working with the product of their thinking. So that felt like another big leap into a space where actually everyone just took it for granted at that point. Well, you do educational research, you do scholarship, and it was like, yeah, but is it good enough? You know, how does it stack up in comparison to some of these names of people that I'm working with now and have worked in these roles before? So yeah, probably 3 moments: moving to another country, having an accident, and moving jobs to a job where everyone took it for granted that that was what you did, rather than having to push it into the space.
That's really interesting. What a series of great events. Well, apart from Breaking Back, that's not a great event, but it's led to great things.
Fully recovered, actually. Goodness knows how and why, but I had a fantastic recovery. So obviously all those grant writing practices and those kind of sharp bits of working at the desk and then going for short walks, they obviously worked.
That's it. Maybe grant writing should be prescribed then in the future. I wonder if there's a causation or correlation graph of that.
I think it's the same one that links pregnancies to ice cream eating, doesn't it?
That's it, yeah. So we did ask for some we did kind of have some conversation beforehand, and you mentioned this thing, and I'm going to pronounce this really incorrectly because this is a new concept for me. Methodolatry.
Yeah.
Did I pronounce that correctly? Methodolatry.
Yeah, methodolatry.
So you've said that's to us. You've said that's one of your favorite research concepts. What is it? I'm genuinely fascinated because I've never come across this idea before.
So methodolatry is where you put on a pedestal an approach to collecting data and use it incessantly in inappropriate places. So the idea, and particularly I love it because I love it from talking and working with people, particularly on master's programs or sometimes on EdDs, but normally by the time people get to EdDs, they've gone beyond being attached to a method and they're actually open-minded about what method will be the best way to investigate my research questions. But very often when you work with more novice researchers, their first step is to go, oh, well, I've done surveys during my dissertation when I was an undergraduate. So when I do my master's dissertation, I'll use surveys. Or they'll say, well, actually, I'm a scientist, and so I'll use big data and I'll do statistical analysis on my qualitative research information. So people get attached to a methodology and find it really hard to leave it behind and to investigate and experiment with a new one. And I think it speaks to me not only because of watching people do this, particularly master's students on MAs in learning and teaching, but also my own experience of the absolute pain and fear of transiting from a researcher in environmental biology, where I was accustomed to dealing with big data and quantitative data, and I really didn't know how to evaluate and assess the validity or the reliability or the value of qualitative data. It was all just, well, that's just an opinion. How can that matter? How can you work with that? So I feel methodolatry as something I had to lose myself, and then I watch other people do it and I kind of have a little bit of a wry smile and go, oh, that's nice. I get the comfort of surveying students when you've got a class of 12 and thinking that's going to give you a robust set of data.
That's really interesting. I've never come across that concept before. So if you were to kind of talk to an early career researcher and about methodology, what would you say to them if they were kind of stuck in that funk or whatever?
I think it's, I mean, the other thing is there another way you could do that? I mean, you'd use a coaching approach, wouldn't you, to kind of explore what the other options were when someone was fixed on a particular idea that you felt was really not going to do justice to the research questions or work within the constraints of whatever else was going on in that research project. But I think once people see it for themaselves and they can see it in themselves, there's a kind of dawning realization of kind of like, oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the example you've given there, Puyin, in the chat of, doing a survey with 6 people, and you probably asked questions that people had to answer yes or no to, and thought you might do some kind of statistical inference from it. I mean, I love that. I love that. I think that's, I just want to hug the people that think and do that, because yeah, we've all been, actually not everyone's been there, but a lot of people have, particularly people who come into a field of research where they are challenged to do other types of research data collection that they haven't done before.
I think
Kelly's found the definition.
Yeah, that's perfect. Don't think it just applies to research either. You're probably right, Kelly. I think there's probably lots of things that are going on that do that.
What can you tell us stories about sort of collaboration disasters and triumphs? Of course, we want a gossip detail, but no names. That we won't ask about any names.
Yeah, no names. I love collaboration when I've got the time for it. And actually it always enriches. You always do better work, I think, or in my experience, I always do better work when I work with other people. But one of my first experiences was writing a paper with a colleague, and we got on brilliantly. We were great colleagues. We really had a fantastic relationship, and it practically broke it, because simply when it came to writing, we were so different in our approach and in our way of writing. So I'm someone who tends to write how I think, or think as I write, and I'm quite bold. I won't stop writing, so I'll write things that I hadn't thought about before, and I'll let the writing go in the direction that my thinking travels in. And I'm quite happy to revisit it and revise it, but it'll be a fairly polished draft of ideas that probably have moved on quite substantially from when we had a conversation with my collaborator before. Whereas this collaborator that I worked with would put everything in the comments section and write in kind of note form. And it took us right up literally to a minute before the deadline that it had to be submitted. And it involved me at the end going in and going, well, that'll just have to do, won't it? Which I was very deeply uncomfortable with, to get it over the line. And I suppose it was a real eye-opener for me that I'd always assumed 2 heads are better than 1. And I think the thinking was better than 1. Probably it was, particularly with hindsight, but the process was so painful that it didn't feel like I'd won out in the kind of sum of things that happened later. So that was a collaboration that, yeah, I wouldn't want to repeat. And I suppose it taught me to always have a conversation with people about how do you work, how do you like to work, what do you think is going to be easy, what do you think is going to be a little bit more problematic, and to be just much more open at the beginning of conversations with people about what I think I am offering, and also what I think I need, not necessarily need, but would value in someone else, and being able to kind of like sort of see those 2 things from the 2 other sides. Collaborations that have worked have always been with people who are super organized. I love working with people who are super organized. I edited a book and worked with somebody who just had the spreadsheet of all spreadsheets to map out all the complexities of the details of the things we had to keep track of. And I'll be honest, I've adopted those practices in so many other writing projects and research projects, and just broadly actually across all other aspects of my life. It was phenomenal. Even the editor of the from the publisher said they'd never seen anything like it. It was the most organized process they'd ever seen. So yeah, so that was pretty impressive. But I think collaboration is just something, it's so enriching, but you do need to be aware of the give and take, but also, as far as you can, kind of preempt it working by being able to be honest about what you can commit, what your strengths are, knowing a little bit about what your weaknesses are as well, and how you like working.
So following on from that, do you now, and you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, do you now prefer to collaborate or research and or work alone?
Oh, I always like collaboration because I like being accountable to someone else. I find the fact that you say to someone, yeah, I'll get that done by next Friday, is a real incentive to get that done by next Friday. Whereas if I were doing it on my own, I'd kind of fool myself that when I said next Friday, I didn't mean next Friday. I meant the first Friday of the next month, or whatever. I just twist my own words and make them kind of fit the fact that, I suppose, in a busy life, when you're trying to do a research project which is opportunistic rather than funded and accountable to a funding body, then actually you do need to keep tight timelines, and having a collaborator is a fabulous place to do that, because they're quite reasonably going to expect you to be honest, because when you've had your conversation with them, when you've set up the discussions about how you're going to work together, that wasn't really part of the deal. You just all took it for granted that whatever you were going to say and do meant that that's what you do then. Yeah.
Did you hear that, John? Did you hear that, John?
Yeah, I'm laughing because Clea and I are currently collaborating on something, and it's I keep having to push the deadline back a little bit.
when I say this is again on record, 1 p.m. this Friday, and I mean this Friday, not next Friday, because we do have a deadline 1 o'clock this Friday.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well is it kind of ties in with that collaboration piece as well, is that sometimes you have to be flexible enough to say, I can't contribute how I plan to. Actually, I know we said we were going to do 50-50 writing on this, but actually for the next 2 months, I can't see this changing. I can't see me being able to do this. If we want to push it over the line, if you've got time, you push it. You be lead author, not me. If you don't want me involved because you feel I haven't contributed sufficiently to be named on whatever comes forward and just acknowledged, then that's fine too. And most people are really generous and will just, if they can as well, adjust the schedule of works either on a different timeline, or in terms of the schedule of works and how it might be distributed, and therefore how acknowledgement of the contribution might be differently kind of inputted into the final product. It just gets a little bit more tricky when you've got external funders or people who've commissioned the work. I think they're the people that probably aren't that open to that kind of change.
Yeah, I understand that. It's fun. We won't kill each other yet. We did run a seminar a couple of years ago on how not to kill your co-author, didn't we? That was the theme of it.
So, I'm glad to report all the panelists from that panel are still well and alive as of today. So I haven't killed each other yet. It's all fun and game. I think collaboration is part and parcel of what we do. I think sometimes, like, I'll be honest here, John and I are doing our writing the cake submission for Van HG. Yeah. And, our kind of core team, other people who are not often hosts of the series, they're like, we don't want to be on a ticket. I was like, well, but you guys have helped. You're just not the face of the project. Doesn't mean you're not really contributing. So sometimes when you say 50-50 writing is important, but sometimes I feel some people are better in planning, some people are better at writing.
Yeah,
So it's a
yeah,
different type of collaboration, isn't it? It's not
absolutely.
always equal contribution to the letter, isn't it?
Yeah. I know I've been in collaborations where the decision has been made that we'll all go alphabetically. And I've always felt a bit sorry to be a Potter then, you know, I've sort of always wished I'd been an aardvark or something. But, you know, I think sometimes that level of kind of decision making feels a bit too arbitrary, whereas I'd rather there was a more honest Injuns conversation about, well, hang on a minute, it didn't quite work out as we planned that we'd all be doing this evenly. Let's reattribute authorship or the kind of resources to reflect the way that this has worked out in reality.
I'm sure I read a joke about that you know, the most cited author in the history of publication is this person et al. But actually, I just want to, I think, bring Simon's, because this interests me as well. Simon's question that he's put in the chat about, you touched upon the fact that some of your roles have been professional services and some academic, which is similar to Simon's experience. Do you think it's materially made a difference to the work you do, or changed the way people in your institution respond to your work?
Yes. I think it's also changed how I feel about the work, as legitimate or not. I think when I've been in roles as interestingly, it depends on the institution as well a bit. When I've been in two extended substantive periods in roles that weren't academic, one at Trinity College Dublin and one at Keele University. And when I was at Trinity, I mean, it was a long time ago, but I was writing papers for committees that read like papers that would be submitted for journal articles, because the expectation of how you convinced people to do anything was very much couched in academic language and based on evidence from a literature base, and arguments were constructed in very familiar academic terms. And that was a kind of a normal way of institutionally working. But I was on a professional services contract. They couldn't reconcile that this new centre could be staffed by somebody academic, and even though they recruited me knowing that that was my background, and it was almost a deal breaker actually in terms of me going, but it was the dream job, and it turned out to be the dream job even on that contract. But I was also working with lots of people from other institutions, and some of them were on academic contracts. There was a real mixed economy at the time, still is now, isn't there? And I think that there was a legitimacy about doing that work, and the contract wasn't really important. It was only important to my employer in terms of the detail of, I suppose, the kind of work they thought I would do, and it turned out to be somewhat more academic than expected. It was a bit different when I came back to the UK. I did work at Keele University on a professional services contract, and there were certainly some individuals and some areas of work, not that I was excluded from in a kind of deliberate way, but there was definitely a sense of, I suppose, that I wouldn't be the priority to support to do this, because it wasn't as core to my identity or my professional set of expected ways of working to continue doing that. But that said, when I pushed, the doors always opened. And I think that's probably it. Maybe you need to more actively push when you're on a professional services contract to be seen and valued for the kind of educational research or scholarship research work that you do. That was a bit long-winded. Sorry, Simon.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
I wanted the long-winded answer, not just the yes. So that's the one that I was after. It's not a dissimilar experience. I think what's interesting, kind of, it very much depends on the institutional culture, I think, as to whether the work you do will end up falling into a PS contract or an academic one. It can often be the same work.
Yeah.
I think clearly if you find yourself in an academic department teaching a subject area that's always going to be academic, but those kind of third space roles can often be in one or the other. And for me, I've never felt as if it's hindered anything. I just got on with the work regardless of what it was. But in some institutions, it absolutely impacts people's ability to do stuff.
Yeah, I think the hindering probably, if anything, has come from me at times in my career where I've felt it may not be considered legitimate for me to get on and do this kind of work. And so I've not made the time for it, or I've done as we were talking about before, you know, I've said, oh, well, I won't do it by next Friday. I'll do it by the first Friday in 3 months' time or whatever, you know, and pushing it down the track and not giving it the priority or the importance that it needed.
So I suppose that kind of brings us and where we've got about 15 minutes left on this idea of paying back, and you've described your current work as paying back, and your involvement in CEDA and the SoTL community of practice, and then you've mentioned that you're looking at this 12 habits for success as well, in terms of for SoTL, and I'd just like you to tell us a little bit more about that and the idea of giving back and what that kind of means to you as a person, obviously, as a person, because you are a person.
No. As a person, as opposed to as a mung bean. I think I've been very fortunate that I've worked with a lot of really good people who have really been generous in terms of encouraging me or including me or teaching me or role modeling for me how to be someone to work with and to kind of be part of a community that progresses knowledge and understands that it's not a competitive race, but it's actually a zeitgeist, that people are gradually moving towards better understanding through the community, sharing knowledge, developing knowledge, and debating knowledge constructively. And that wasn't what I understood in science. In science, I was set up in a research team against research teams from other institutions globally to basically be the first to show that. It was always a race rather than a collaborative endeavour. And I think when I moved into the education space, it really became clear that that wasn't the kind of thinking and activity and the way forward and the way people worked. And I suppose at this point, I'm kind of aware that I've built up a range of contacts and knowledge about how things do work. And it's nice to be able to, give back sounds a bit trite maybe, but I suppose it's about taking on a different role sometimes, of just leading how people can collaborate and communicate around research and practice. So the CEDA SoTL community is for educational developers that do their own SoTL and educational research, but primarily it's supporting them to support others. So it's that network of educational developers who encourage educational research and SoTL in their own institutions. And we're looking at providing a space for them to come together, to be sparked, to listen to other people's activities and see what that does in terms of developing their own practice, but also to contribute to the kind of shaping of how knowledge is perceived around SoTL. So we're doing a piece of work to come up with a visual representation of what SoTL means to add to the other mechanisms that have been used to describe it. And then this book is a complete passion project. I was reading Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Effective Leaders, or whatever it's called, and I thought, what a great model for a kind of populist book. And what if we did something similar, but in an academic area? And what would be the habits for success if you were going to be a scholarly researcher? So we approached a couple of publishers, and we're publishing it hopefully next year if everything goes to plan, which it is at the moment. And we've got these 12 habits that we talk about the value of cultivating them to become a successful researcher. And they're not, it's at the complete extreme end. So there's nothing in this book about methods, because methods are kind of techniques and skills rather than habits. But these are things that we think that you should really do to develop your capability and your career and your productivity, if that's what you want, and your enjoyment of being a SoTL researcher or an educational researcher. So yeah, we've got things like reading the literature, writing regularly, telling people what you're doing, developing emotional intelligence, maximizing your impact. There's a whole 12 of them, which I can't tell you off the top of my head. But it's a really good book, and it's bringing together 32 collaborators, in addition to myself and the 2 other editors, to contribute as a sort of text that you can dip in and out of, and hopefully it just gives you real inspiration about, I don't know, the kinds of sort of tacit expectations there are about being an educational researcher or a scholar of SoTL.
What's your favorite habit, or the habit that you stick by all the time that works, Jackie?
The one that
Just the one, if you picked out from the 12.
The one that I stick by, as opposed to the one that I would like to cultivate more of.
Tell us both. Tell us both.
I suppose the one I would probably like to cultivate more of is kind of keeping up with the literature. And I think probably I find that difficult because I am opportunistic in my research practices and topics. The literature is very broad, whereas where I'm more narrowly focused on one thing, it would be easier to keep on top of it. And because I very often will, I don't know, see an opportunity to apply for money or to take a research approach to a particular activity, it will then mean that I do more thinking around that. And I think the one that I think is probably to some extent most important is taking up opportunities. And that's probably the one that I've kind of cultivated most, which is, not closing doors and keeping doors open, or finding doors that you can go through.
What about you, John? Then I'm going to tell you mine because I'm still thinking.
I think mine is just it's space and time, giving yourself space and time to digest things. I think actually one of the best habits is knowing when to walk away as well. I think, my own, I intercalated for a year because it was just too much with everything that was going on. So I walked away for a year and come back. So there you go. That's my best habit, I think.
Yeah. I've just found the list of the habits that we've addressed. So
yeah,
amazing. Yeah. What's yours, Puyin, then?
Well, the one that I need to do, but I'm not doing, is writing regularly. That's for sure. Yeah. And I think the one thing I need to start doing is similar to John, is start saying no to things, because I'm always curious. And so and so's doing that, so and so's doing that. I want to be involved, and then I realize I'm having too much, and then I don't end up doing anything, because you can't. Yes, we can multitask, but multitasking isn't really multitasking. You're just being good at many things, but not good at any of them. So just be a bit focused on one or two things, and not be in that sort of nearly doctor stay for much longer.
Yeah, there's a great piece in there by one of our collaborators or co-authors, who's written a case study, and she talks about something called benefit stacking, which is about leveraging value out of activity, which I think I've never heard of the phrase before. And in fact, I wonder if it's a phrase that she's invented herself, and it might be going out into the public for the first time in the book. But it's just a lovely idea that if you're, I don't know, going to win a grant and you're going to go and do a piece of research, that you don't just write the article at the end of the year, but you write the blog at 3 months describing how it's going, and you do the workshop at 9 months to tell people what the outputs and the findings are before you've written it, and get some feedback from them, so that informs the final article that you write. And it's just, that's a poor example. Hers is much more polished and developed, but it just is a lovely idea that really looking for what you can also do as part of a project, rather than seeing it just as an output or a deadline by which you need to report to a funding body, for example.
I think that's what Simon Thompson's very good at. I'm aware of that because I have a little beer mat here still on my desk. In fact, I've got two of them, and Ian's got them there as well. So Jackie, we'll kind of draw it close. I mean, we will still take some questions and things like that, but kind of drawing to its close. And I think this is a nice question to end on, actually. What, like, if you look back at your career in SoTL and things like that, is there anything that you would say you're most proud of in terms of either research output or in terms of what you've managed to achieve? What would you say, you know what, I'm really proud that I achieved that? I know it can sometimes be a difficult question, but I think it's a nice one to end on.
I don't know if it's what I'm proud of, but I've accumulated a lot of fantastic friendships along the journey of doing pedagogic research and scholarship of teaching and learning. People who I totally admire, have wanted to, or I've managed to cajole them into working with me in some form or other. And it's been an absolute pleasure to learn from them, and it's been a pleasure to work with them. And I've had people who I haven't really known before the onset of a project or a piece of scholarly work, and I've got to know them and they've become firm, close friends. And I think just that side hustle of creating a community of people with whom I've got something in common, whether it's a project or a piece of work, it has just been fantastic.
I have a slightly sort of cringy question to ask. It's you know, John and I started this series because as an excuse for us to steal wisdom from you know, wiser people such as yourself. What advice do you have for sort of people who are sort of starting out research and just don't know where to start?
It's that habit about being realistic. Yeah, do what you can and don't do more. So think small, think close to home, think about benefit stacking, think about leveraging the most you can from something that's realistic within the context that you're working in to be able to be delivered. I think the things where I've failed, maybe not the right word, but failed to deliver to my expectations, are one where my expectations were just wildly extravagant. And not realistic, you know, things that just the sustained contribution to the activity couldn't be maintained, or there were too many complexities, too many interdependencies with other people or other parts of my working life that meant that it wasn't going to happen. So as far as you can, keep it small and bounded, and yeah, make as much of it as you can and let things develop incrementally from that.
Unexpected incidents and happy endings in various chapters, such as what you just described, the things that you perhaps didn't plan and then it worked out brilliantly. I think that's the excitement of not overthinking, just go with the flow. I think that's what I'm getting, which is something I'm very bad at. But you know,
it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think to be a good researcher, you have to be very planful. So actually, then to tell yourself not to be so planful is kind of quite a tough call.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been very much appreciated. It's been an absolute privilege
it's been
to
lovely.
speak to you.
And good luck with your current writing project, Puyin and John, and to everyone else as well with whatever writing or research projects you're on.